To be completely honest, we need to start thinking about how Japan's solving their problems because their problems are going to be our problems very quickly. It makes me really sad to think about what the kids of the future kind of have to look forward to. You know, um, the Super Sentai series of today try to like Gozuger in particular. Gozuger tries to talk about the loser, the guy that's left behind in society. The girl that doesn't quite fit in because of whatever reason. It's not necessarily nefarious. It could just be a divergent interest pool that doesn't put her in line with the majority of girls in her age group, you know? And Gozuger is trying to lean into that because this is a growing identity in Japan. You have the hikikomori, who are, I believe, almost 6 million strong now in Japan. And these are men who have not left the 4 square walls of their apartment in over 6 months. That's how the Japanese government defines them. And what I mean is these guys quite literally do not go outside. Hikikomori is someone who is a shut-in. That it means quite literally to go within, to go inside, to go within yourself. And so um, that necessarily isn't informing Super Sentai, but it is informing Japanese culture. A lot of men have checked out of the dating market, of the marriage market, trying to rise above their current position in life. They're trying to hold on to their current position in life. They're not focused on forward momentum. And Gozuger is kind of talking about that, where the heroes are not necessarily motivated through a righteous sense of self-gain, but rather a wish to be granted, to take all the hard work of that change, of that chase for glory away and shortcut it. And again, this is an attitude that's growing in Japan. For us, if you're a millennial out there or a late Gen Xer, if for our age group in Japan is not necessarily known as the millennials. They're known as the forgotten generation. The housing collapse that happened there robbed a whole generation of Japanese from going to from college into the workforce. What happens is every single year, every corporation in Japan starts pulling talent out of the universities. And these kids work their entire lives, their whole lives. I'm talking about from kindergarten all the way up through university to get a job at these specific companies. It's really a lifelong ambition to get hired there. And what happened in 2008 was this is when I graduated was in 2008. What happened when the housing crisis hit, those corporations froze that hiring. This had never been done since the practice began. And so a whole generation of Japanese youth were completely tossed to the skids. They can't get these jobs because again, if the corporation goes and seeks outside of that, they're going to miss the new talent from the university. So they can't afford to invest in people who didn't make the cut. And even though they would have made it because of the hiring freeze, they did not make it, regardless of their talent, skill, and dedication. So you have a whole generation that's completely disillusioned with what happened. And they went and had kids. And so those kids saw their parents suffering, saw their inability to change their lives, and has now grown up with that mentality being the norm. They don't want to have children because it's too difficult. Not necessarily that it's too expensive, because again, if you want to have children, you can make it happen. They don't necessarily need the newest, bestest things. But these kids have witnessed the struggle that their parents went through and don't want to repeat that on their children. And that's the poison, right, that Gozuger is trying to be the antidote to by presenting all of these loser characters that are trying to go from zero to hero in a single move. Okay? All of them have the ambition of having a single wish granted that changes their life. Sort of like how Kamen Rider Geats was about that. You competed in the Grand Prix, then you could change reality to your whim. Right down to the fundamentals of it. However, if you wanted the sky to be purple, that was possible. If you wanted flying whales to attack people, that happened. That kind of thing. And that kind of thing. But Gozuger, again, is trying to hyper focus on the loser this time. This is the big angle that they're going with, is that the heroes are not people who have any business being role models. They're not they're not aspirational heroes. This is one of few times in Sentai where they choose to create heroes that are not you people that start out as people you should not be modeling yourself after, but become people who are role models over their experiences and the lesson they learned pursuing a self-centered goal only to discover a more um, society serving goal is much more fulfilling for them. This is a big lesson for Japanese youth right now. This again, this can go from like 5 years old all the way up to 30 over there. Because again, that whole age group had, well, 40 really if you get into the forgotten generation. This speaks to that whole swath of people that saw the Japanese miracle die in front of them, collapse into their lap, most dramatic style possible, just burn away in an instant. And so even the kids recognize that opportunity isn't there for them. And so Gozuger's stepping in and saying, look at all these people that want to change their life in a single motion. They just want to wish to make all of the bad things in their lives to go away. And now they're going to learn a lesson that that's not good. The show will say that that's possible, but you know as well as I do, the eventual end of it is going to be the heroes learning that a single motion to change your life is wrong. And the heroes will be shown as like having subtle changes over the 50 episode run of how they conduct themselves. And again, maybe a good message to bring to the American youth, but it would be very difficult to communicate because we don't acknowledge the struggle. We make memes about it. It's funny to talk about, but we don't out and out try to sit down and Francis Ford Coppola express this. We don't out and out try to really connect with the problem because if we did, then we have to acknowledge that there's not an easy solution. We do that, we lose votes, we lose consumers, blah, blah, blah. We have to tell everybody everything's fine, wonderful all the time, and they're crazy if they think otherwise. Meanwhile, here's Gozuger that says, here's some guys that are kind of like your parents. They didn't really get a chance in life. They're trying to make it. It's not going so great. And now they've got a shot to make their dreams come true in one single motion. What will they do? What would you do? I think it's clever. I think it's smart. And I think it takes the temperature of how I think a lot of youth in the world feel. A lot of people under the age of 40 really feel trapped, really feel like they need one single wish that could change everything. If they had one thing that let them take off, they could just go forever. They just needed one single change, one turn of the dial, and it'll change everything. So I think it's a really fun and interesting concept for young people around the world. We'll have to see if it catches on in that the US gets an idea, based out of this because, it's a bit of what Mr. Beast plays into, that belief that if I had $1,000,000, my life would be completely different, and what do you know? It really isn't. You just have more bills and more stuff to clean up or take care of, you know? We'll have to wait and see. I don't know, but, Uh, watch a ton of Korean media these days, but that doesn't really tell me anything about the people so much. Well, it should. It should though. Is that like very much how American media is a sample of the current time of the current zeitgeist? So too is Korean media, Japanese media, Chinese media, all of it. It has to appeal to people. And in order to do that, you have to appeal to something that they relate to. And the easiest way to do that is to take the temperature of the current culture and try to build something out of what either is the most popular thing in the zeitgeist or something that speaks to most of the people participating in that particular end of the culture pool. The reboots that come out here in the US, they're meant to appeal to the boomers and Gen X because they had the most money. You're gonna see this pivot into anime and video games now because the corporations are going to pursue millennials, Zoomers, and alphas more than Gen X because Gen X is a tiny generation versus the millennials and Zoomers and alphas pooled together. Gen X's interests are also divergent because they were not infected by the Asian invasion. The year 2000 brought in a lot of anime, a lot of J-pop, a lot of Japanese influence, whereas the 80s had a lot of Japanese technology come through. And so we had like the full-on cultural taste testing from Japan, which is the sample platter. which was Toonami. Of course, Toonami inspired so many other ones. By the time I was 20 years old, the majority of entertainment that I could casually enjoy through Cartoon Network, Sci-Fi, G4 was dominated by Japanese influence. And so, um, when you go and you take a look at what's going on in Korea, it's the same thing, is that Best Korea, which is South Korea, Best Korea is putting out media that is like, um, you know, Korean media right now is trying to tiptoe around, the societal unrest that's going on in the country. People know there's something wrong, that something needs to be done, that China is getting too close, that China is building up too much influence around the world, and especially in the region that they're in, there's too much pollution from China. And so a lot of the Korean media deals with gangsters. It deals with people who are the hero is either like a lackadaisical kind of offish, oafish, out of shape cop guy, or he's very committed, very driven, very RoboCop-like in that he's gonna get the guy no matter how it happens. There's very few gray area characters that are sort of like Columbo, that are sort of casually driven to solve mysteries. Um, Charles Brosnan's style of hero is probably closer to what Korean crime drama heroes are today. They're grizzled, middle-aged men who take every advantage they can to get the criminal, whether it's legal or not. Again, this is a reflection of just how uncomfortable it is to have over 50% of your population concentrated into one city. So it crime drama is kind of ruling over there right now because people again are seeing a lot of societal unrest where folks are piled on top of each other by the millions over there. I'm not kidding you when I say almost I think it's over 50% of the South Korean population live in Seoul now. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. Japan spared itself that by having several cities that absorb most of the population, but even so, the countryside's completely desolate. That's why you don't see entertainment from Japan that does much about the countryside. There's that anime about old people who, the grandpa and grandma being young people again, and they're on their farm, and there's media exploring the heritage of Japan's farms. There's media that shows the farmers are still farming in Japan, but largely there's not a lot of like stories that enshrine the experience of the farmer, the country living, that kind of thing anymore. Because again, that's not how you communicate with modern Japanese. They don't really have an attachment to the countryside anymore, like their grandparents and parents did, who did move into the city seeking opportunity from those country areas. This is sort of like a distant thing that's in a photo book to them, similar to how the Koreans feel about it. It's why a lot of their media, the Asian media, has been so city focused for like 30 years now because again, most of their populations drained into those city places seeking opportunity. Another thing that's part of Gozuger is that a lot of the fights and conflicts that they're having are taking place in this urban zone, as opposed to the heroes having to go all over the country in order to meet these different heroes the way Street Fighter did, right? Yep. Squid Games get into a lot of that. A lot of like the societal unrest where like I don't like where I am, I'm trapped, I don't know how to change it, that kind of thing. Again, around the world, most youth are experiencing this, but particularly in Korea, this is a very big problem because like again, everybody lives in the city. It was already bad back in '05, the first tour of South Korea. 2012, it felt like you could breathe there. Um, can't imagine now. Seoul is super dense. Again, like over 50% of South Koreans live in Seoul. They tried to build a different city, but because the corporations didn't move there, the people didn't. Samsung, quite literally, is a cyberpunk dystopian, iron fisted leader in South Korea right now. Samsung is everything. Samsung even owns funeral homes. Okay, just kind of they own the hospital where your child's born. They own the funeral they own the funeral home where your child wishes you goodbye for the last time. Okay, I can't imagine owning people from cradle to grave like that. But that's what happens when you Have 50% of your population living in a city. The corporations fill the gap of what would be a mom and pop funeral home, I guess. Funeral home. City sickness, as they'd call it in a historical context. What most of this is reminding me of. Yeah, well, it is. It's the urbanization of humanity has been one of the greatest detriments to the human experience. Stagnation of creativity is born out of this, stagnation of innovation is born out of this, and the stagnation of unity. What makes humans want to create unity among each other is that we're different, right? The more different we are, a lot of the times we want to bridge that gap and learn about each other, sort of like how we are in the West being fascinated by what goes on in Japan, and likewise, Japan being fascinated about what goes on in the West. This is good. But when you pile everybody together, that difference of idea, that cultural difference can't exist. Everyone's the same. So then you start looking for differences in order to assign yourself a separate identity. And in a city, that becomes very, very difficult. And thus, everybody becomes your competitor to create an identity for yourself. It's one of those things where if you watch enough of like the early 90s late 80s anime and Japanese movies, Japanese television, sitcoms, that sort of stuff, it is full display. They talk about it, how living in the city, you lose your identity. You lose who you are. You become another cog in the machine, and then one day you wake up and you wanna go postal because so many years have been wasted just punching a time card and making sure that you didn't fart on the subway or else you'd inconvenience other people. And that's ultimately what ends up kind of destroying us as a human as a human species is this desire to culminate into one area. And it's very bad for us to do that. It's good to have people out on the farm, good to have people in a city, sure. Good to have people in a neighborhood, good to have people up on a mountain, good to have people down by the beach. They need to be different places. It's what helps, humanity grow and change and become different and become better. Meanwhile, you go piling 50% of your national population into a city. Guess what? They're all going to like the same music. They're all going to like the same movies. They're all going to like the same cars. They're all going to like the same cell phone company. They don't have a choice. But again, this is another thing that's talked about in Gozuger, as I just pointed out. Everybody who wants to fight to compete for this wish, this number one status in Gozuger, all exist in this city, all exist in this one country. They may come here from other countries, but the heroes are not traveling around, which again demonstrates the limited nature of how people on the ground, the youth in Japan, talking about maybe kids, but mainly probably the 16 to 25-year-old demographic, really feel about their opportunity in Japan. The city chokes them out, but they don't have any other option. It's not like going into the country is going to help them. Working remotely in Japan slows down your ability because you have to impress the boss. Watch any documentary about being a Japanese businessman. You have to go drinking with your boss until the wee hours of the morning almost every night. It's really not a joke. These guys have to go out and drink with their boss. Every single new contract constitutes a new party. The boss feels a compulsion to celebrate with his people so they feel like they're part of the victory. Then the people feel the compulsion to celebrate with their boss so that they have an opportunity to move up the ladder. And it's sad, but that's what they're kind of um, you know, dealing with. And again, you see this in Gozuger, the little boy who is at the cafe apartment building that the Red Ranger lives at. Um, that little boy doesn't have a father. There's no father present, but it's not expressed that he's dead. There's no conversation about where the father is. So it's assumed that he's at work, busy doing his thing. To be completely honest, we need to start thinking about how Japan's solving their problems because their problems are going to be our problems very quickly. If you're not paying attention, men are checking out of day-to-day life. That's what happened in Japan and what contributed to the birth decline is that as the manosphere guys, those trusted shepherds of masculinity, as they call it, the return on investment is very low right now for American men. So to become married, to start a life, to seek that kind of companionship is rapidly evolving into something you seek online or out of an AI. Anime characters, we see waifus becoming much more popular in the West as men fixate on fictional women. And again, I'm not poo-pooing anybody. What are you supposed to do? If they don't have an OnlyFans, they're probably some kind of drug addict, and then inversely, if you're a woman trying to find a man, he's probably some OnlyFans addicted guy, and, you end up finding guys that have a completely wrong interpretation of how relationships work because they've only observed it through video games or through anime or through movies. They didn't have a father in the home to role model to them. I think it's 1 in every 4 children in America is born to a home without a father being present. Either he's dead, divorced, out of the picture completely, however it is. 1 in 4. So that's influencing our media, clearly. You take a look at what's going on, and we're just simply not trying to understand how the Japanese are dealing with this, and we need to. We need to have conversations like this. We need to analyze how their media is dealing with depopulation, what they're doing to combat it, and what they're doing to accept the tragedy in the short term, the next 20 years, that they have to hold their breath through in the hopes that they can build back a population that can support the current economy, not even the one that was at its heyday. Okay? That's an incredibly big task, and we need to be talking about it too. Where I live, here in Maine, right here, 60% of the population is boomers. That's people over 65. In the next 8 years, those won't be around. And they're still working, by the way. They're still pulling their weight around here. So when they leave, there simply aren't enough bodies. There aren't enough bodies to put into the positions these people are dying out of. And this is what's happening in Japan. And this isn't just Maine. Go anywhere in the United States, this is what's happening. The majority population is dying off due to old age. We're just not talking about it. We don't want to face it the way the Japanese have to because it's more prevalent on their day-to-day lives than it is for us. But it will be very soon. And we are not having these conversations. We are not trying to reach out to youth that are left behind to get them re-involved in an economy that's limping along, to get them re-involved in a culture that's become so corporatized that we don't really even know what the fuck an American really is. Ask yourself, is there a single sentence anymore that can define what an American is? No, there isn't. It's like an entire goddamn TED Talk just to introduce to you what a burger-loving, NASCAR-loving, American flag-waving American really is.